what you have had. You know, the Lord spoke to me about that CFT has come to the place where God will lend us to nations. And I'm starting that from the youth convention in Nigeria this year. The youth convention in Nigeria this year, I have asked that they should get me the best of their hotel, the most prominent for corporate conference and seminars. And some of them who are professionals are going to go in the team. And we're going to advertise in the whole country, with at least all over the place we could, within the nation, what we're about to offer, that we're not just teaching spiritual. Some of them will teach on various aspects of career development or mentoring, so that we go out of the shell of the church and we can bring in those who matter. And I'll put it on the television in Nigeria so that they can know we have resources in the church that can solve the problem of the government and the nation. And having said that, next year, not this year, I'll be going with the team of my administrators to Nigeria to teach about this to the parliament or to the House of Assembly, the House of Law. You have representative, you have Senate, and we're going to hold conference for corporate organization targeting top bank officials and conglomerates in Nigeria. And we're going there to look into all the areas we're looking at here, which some of them we're teaching you here, but we'll tailor it down to the corporate organization operation in Nigeria. The Bible says we will lend to nation. It's not just talking about money. Also, it's talking about brain. We are so grateful to God for the 2 exposés that we received. The next person that I'm inviting is one of our pastors also, who is a member of the trustee and an administrator. He started his career as an architect with a master's degree in architecture. He rose to the position of a director in a property development company in the UK. And also now he's assigned to an executive position looking into a very high project of construction in London. He recently finished his MBA in Cranfield and currently doing his PhD in micro, whatever it is, he will tell you, I think micro business in Cranfield. Let's welcome together Pastor Tayo. Pastor Tayo Bilewu.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. As you all know, I don't like talking much. But I'll surprise everyone this afternoon by recognizing that both Pastor Sidney and Pastor Fumi have spent a lot of time, and I'm certain that I don't want to be the one between you and your break. Praise the Lord. Well, I normally focus on this aspect because, as you probably would have realized, across the team of trustees at Christ Faith Tabernacle, we try to ensure that each one of us has an area of particular focus. So whilst we have a broad oversight of what's going on, there are individuals, and like Pastor Fumi said, I'm the one that likes giving everyone a lot of homework. So there's a lot of homework for you to do. But I also believe in not trying to reinvent the wheels. There's a lot of information for us churches out there that is very, very important and relevant to us going forward. And because, as Pastor Fumi said earlier on, if you're in the UK, you're a registered charity. I hope. If you're not, you're missing out on a lot. Because there's no guarantee that the benefits that are available to registered charities of being able to reclaim the gift or the offering, the gift that your members give, and reclaiming the tax on that, there's no guarantee that it will still be around in a few years' time. There is a lot of pressure on it. And because also there's been a lot of abuse recently. Unfortunately, the reason why things are a bit still, would I use the word, being contained, is because they are trying to find a means by which they will separate the weeds and the chaff from the real thing. Otherwise, they would have swept it off a few years ago. So we need to recognize that this is coming. And if it is coming, as churches, we need to align ourselves to make it easier. And that's the important, the key word, to make it easier for us to be recognized as the bona fide organizations that should benefit from this. And for us to do that, it's a high level of discipline. Things that are not in themselves wrong, inherently they're not wrong. We can justify them, but they might not be, it might be very difficult for us to explain to the external world, because we end up referring them strictly to scriptures. And guess what? The people we're talking about to don't believe in the scriptures you're talking about in the first place, or they believe because of the different interpretations we have over it in the church that you can all twist it to suit you. So we're not going to start from referring to scriptures. So we start really by looking at what does the law of the land say for registered charities. So we simply say, how do we ensure that as a church we conform in totality to what the Charity Commission rules ask us or require of us? And this is the point where there is no, we overlay it later on with the spiritual. But first, we do all things, having done all things to stand therefore. So we ensure that we are standing, and such that others who come in to scrutinize us can find nothing against us. Pastor Sidney alluded a few years ago to the point where we had a visit to the Charity Commission. What I believe impressed them the most was the strategy we adopted. It was quite interesting. We all, for that day, parked our spiritual offices. And we put it to the side, and we simply talked about who we are as a professional. And so we started off by being on the same level. So we were not talking scriptures. We were talking of what does the law say about companies? What does the law say? And who am I? Apostle has already introduced, by God's grace, I'd been opportune to be an executive director of organizations, sitting in positions of authority. So when you start talking about that, you first approach it that way, to say, these are the sort of companies I'm responsible for. And by the way, the turnover of such companies were in millions. And what are you talking about here? Now, I'm not saying it's to intimidate, but you have to start with a position of knowledge. And guess what? If they now know you know, and they start talking to you on that level, you definitely must know. Because if you don't know, you've just created a problem for yourself. So it's not one where you sort of start by pretending you know. If you don't know it, you are then in big trouble, because the hammer falls further. I mean, it's just like when we talk about certain things on construction. There are things that you might be able to get away with in construction terms and do and employ. If I do it, I could get jailed for it, because I know, I am expected to know that when an individual wants to change these light bulbs, they cannot just stand on a table. You understand that? Now, and there are times in the church, some people want to do certain things. I say, I am here. And because I'm here, you can't do it. If I am not, and you do it and get away with it, but if they ask who was around, and I state that I am culpable, because I know better. Now, that's the important bit as well. You know better. And so from today, you will know much better. You can no longer hide. All right, that was just the introduction. Did I say I don't want to talk much? So effectively, the reference documents that I'll talk about very, very briefly is something that the Charities Commission have called the Essential Trustee. It's a guidance note, CCC 3. Is it 3? Yes, I believe it is. CCC 3, Charity Commission Guidance, and it's called the Essential Trustee. It's a booklet that's got only 40 pages. It's a booklet that's got only 40 pages. If you want to supplement your reading, I dare say, and I'll charge him for this, that I recommend that you buy on Amazon a publication that was put together by Paul Martin, Wellers, who has been for many years our solicitor, our corporate solicitor in Christ Faith Tabernacle, Paul Martin. He wrote a book, The A to Z of Charities, Operating Charities, Church Charities. The book, I checked it last night, is only about £15. Please read it. It's very comprehensive. It's called Faith, Hope, and Charity. And thank God, Paul Martin is a Christian. And that's important as well. So he brings at it from law, legal. I understand he's now retired. He's now consulting only because the age of retirement has caught up on him. But that's okay. So I'll recommend those. It's called Faith, Hope, and Charity. And it's Paul Martin, A to Z, anything you want to know about charity. Now, can I also put a quick disclaimer? That publication was written about a couple of years ago. It's possible there might be changes. So don't read it and say, but that's what Pastor Tayo said. Just read that book and you're up to date. You need to stay on top of things. So the Essential Trustee contains six main duties. 6 main duties. You need to first and foremost ensure that your charity is carrying out its purpose for public benefit. First and foremost, ensure that your charity is carrying out its purpose for the public benefit. It means that you need to be able to define for yourself in your objects as a church what your public benefit is. So what is the question we always ask. If we are not here, what difference does it make to the community? And it's a bit of a soul-searching question. And actually, we need to ask ourselves as a church as well, if we're not benefiting the public, why are we here? And please don't simply say to me, but I'm leading them to heaven. Because that's crucial. However, there needs to be more to it. We said, Pastor Fumi shared a few minutes ago, that there was a time when there was a recession. Before the recession came in Christ Faith Tabernacle, one of the prophetic word for us in the church was, in the time of recession, you will have plenty. I can assure you that the benefits we had at the time was that our income as a church was going up. And it wasn't simply because people were getting promoted in the midst of a recession. Now, there were some people who had the challenges, and there were some people who did lose their jobs, but in the midst of it, they were getting new jobs, and they were being promoted. And there was a different positive attitude to it. There's a point where you see obstacles, and you say, help, I can't go over. And there are other times you come across the obstacles and say, well, I know the man of God said this would happen, but it's because God means something positive for me. And I always say that it's easier to, one of the reasons why it's easier to get a job when you're in a job is because when you go into that job, you're more positive. And it shows. And as a result, what's the link with that in the church? Because people were not downcast when they lose their job, they were able to go confidently again. But that confidence was built in by the church. That's a public benefit. I've just used an example as to how you can translate. So don't say, I'm leading people to heaven, but what are you feeding the flock? And you need to be able to capture this. So one of the challenges we have is to say to ourselves, how do we capture this and put it into words that could describe to the world out there what we're doing? Because if all we said to them is, people come to church and they're excited and we preach every Sunday and what's the public benefit? The fact that we can point to the established facts, actually, that in Christ Faith Tabernacle we had successful graduates. We had people coming out with first-class degrees. We capture this. To capture, you need to monitor. If you don't monitor, what you don't measure, you cannot, what's the word that they normally, if you don't measure, you cannot really give an account. And accountability is one of those things that we sometimes run away from. But we need to, if you aim, I always say, if you aim at nothing, you'll get it. What would you get? Nothing. So the first thing is to ensure that we're carrying out our purpose. It also means we need to spell out what is our purpose. At Christ Faith Tabernacle, we have a big motto. What does it say? Building overcomers for tomorrow. And so if anything we're doing is not aligned to our mission statement, why are we doing it? So it means that you need to ensure, and I'm, again, sharing this with churches, we need to ensure that whatever we're doing is aligned to why we are here. And I always say this as well as an individual. Could you ask yourself, why am I here? And not just, why am I at the cathedral building? Why am I walking the surface of this earth? What's my purpose? And then as a church, what's our purpose? So we need to define those. And then the next thing I would say is that we need to comply with our charities' governing documents and the law. We need to comply with our charities' governing documents and the law. It means every church has a governing document. Pastor Sidney explained earlier on something about the fact that we have financial regulations. So, we've written the financial regulations. If we don't comply, we're breaking the rules of engagement. If we break the rules of engagement, more often than not, when an independent auditor comes in, they don't ask you why you don't, they might ask you why you don't have a document, but the minute you produce a document, they'll then ask you, why are you not complying with your own documents? You've written the rules, you said you will do X, Y, Z, and you're not doing it. So you're failing yourself. So it means as well that we don't write, and some of the time you ask yourself, well, should we just then not write? Because if we don't write, there's nothing. Then you'll fall foul again of not having something and rules and regulations in play. And these documentations are things that we need to have in place. Now, I'll chip this in very quickly. One of the things we do at least once each year, twice mainly, we try and review it twice. But we have a main meeting with Apostle, administrators and trustees in Christ Faith Tabernacle, where we sit down from the morning to the end of the day for as long as it takes us. On at least we try and do this at least twice a year, but in the main we focus on one where we go through these items and ask ourselves. There's some other searching questions in each of these categories, which I'll sort of like run through. So as an example, and as I say, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. It's not something we've designed for ourselves. It's something that's been designed out there and we implement. So our duty is to implement it. So as an example, when we talked about ensuring we're carrying out our charity's purpose, it says, what can your charity do and can't do within its purposes? How is your charity fulfilling its purposes and benefiting the public? What difference is your charity really making? What difference are you making? Actually, you could ask yourself the same thing as an individual. If I don't go to work, would anyone know I'm not there? What difference am I making? I've had a specific challenge this week that is really bringing a few things home to us in our small organization, because at the moment, we've got having done a number of things, privileged at the moment to be combining for the first real time, really. I've always externally dealt with investment organizations. Now I'm in an investment organization, so I do more of financing. And you're asking how an architect got there, but somehow he did. So I do more of the funding and investments and deal with more things on that side. And we've got a very, very small team. And this week has been seriously challenging because we've got an investment committee meeting next week. And all the documents that needed to be lined up this week. And it still hasn't gone out yet. They're waiting for me to send the email this afternoon. I need to send it to the investment committee this afternoon. But there's so many parts to it, moving parts. Now, the reason I said that is that all of a sudden it dawned on us that if for whatever reason I called in sick this week, nothing would happen. And £1 million projects will go down the drain. Now, that's not a right place for an organization to be. But we're small, we're startup, we're small. I've brought that in the context of the church as well. It's not the right place for the church to be if only one person holds everything and nothing can move with that one person. That's why Apostle needed to surround himself with people. And when it comes to these issues, the leadership of such points defer to the individual who's leading everyone else, but it's our requirement to educate others as well. So when it comes to chairing, Apostle would, for instance, chair the meeting, but invariably when it comes to the different parts, accounting, the person who leads the discussion is the individual, Pastor, for me in this instance, it doesn't mean that she's the sole custodian of the information, but she leads that conversation because actually, if we've got individuals, if we've got ourselves being quizzed externally, we would hope that if we're all put in different rooms, we can all give the same answer to the different questions. That's why when the HMRC came around and they were trying to ask Apostle questions and Pastor Sidney was talking and answering, they were amazed because some of the things were actually quite personal. They were trying to discuss Apostle's personal finances. And they wanted to know, please, can you excuse so that we can have a discussion? And the Apostle said, no. It's rare because I dare say in some homes, husbands and wives do not even discuss. And that's an indictment if that's happening. You don't know. Now, I'm not talking in terms of, I'm not overlay. You don't know, or you're keeping resources and income away from each other. Now, that's worrying. So how much more in the church? Now, I use that as an example of just I chip that in to talk about the need for collective decision. And in this process, you need to ensure in the church that it's not just you. There needs to be confidence. There needs to be people who you trust, who you entrust. And I always use the word others who you are vulnerable to. And I use that carefully as well. They need to know everything. This is more so when we're talking about sister churches or partner churches, PVM churches. Please find people who you can entrust and trust the vision to alongside yourself. Don't be the sole custodian. Well, ultimately, you're responsible. It doesn't take away the fact that ultimately Apostle is responsible for the people he selects to work with him, but don't be the only one who knows everything about anything. Don't be a sole signatory. And I know we talked about, Pastor Sidney talked about Apostle needing to be a signatory to different accounts. It's not, when he said it, I thought it might be nice to clarify. It's not designed to stifle. And it's not designed to create, it doesn't mean any branch church could not move and operate without that. We've got the guidelines that enable that to happen. The whole idea of that is to ensure that actually, if you know there's another, ultimately, if the questions will be asked of him, he would delegate those responsibilities. We use here, for instance, as an example, alongside Apostle and Reverend Omar, I am an A signatory category. So effectively, if neither of them are around, I could, with the discussion, sign on their behalf. But I cannot sign as a B category. So, for instance, Pastor Sidney and myself cannot sign. We can sign together, but he cannot sign, he cannot sign with Pastor Adisa because they're both B categories. So it also means that every single expenditure, there needs to be discussions. It needs to happen. As opposed to Apostle just signing off and saying, I want to buy this. He can't do that on his own. And we need to discuss it. And that's been really keeping yourselves in check. So there are times, the focus we always say is this: where do we want to get to? And once we're aligned as to where we want to get to, there might be different ways of getting there. What we really, really appreciate and respect Apostle for is that opportunity of deferring within us. It defers to expertise. And he asks the questions. We thank God he's an all-rounder. But at the same, but it's true. It's only in the midst of questioning and challenging and asking. And in the process as well, at times I speak like this. Some people might think, well, has he studied law? Has he done this? I'm introduced as an architect, but then I've done all sorts of things. But it's about getting yourselves rounded, and it's a big responsibility. The third area that we need to touch on there is you need to act in your charity's best interest. And that illustration I've just given at the moment links into acting in your charity's best interest. Some things we might want to do may not be wrong, but they may not be in our best interest as a charity. There's nothing wrong with it, but it may not be in our best interest. So it's about making balanced and informed decisions. It's about recognizing and dealing with potential conflicts of interest. Now, this is an interesting one. Pastor Sidney alluded to the fact that as a local pastor or as a pastor, you might have expenses. You are not allowed to authorize your own expenses. Why? Because there's a potential for conflict of interest. You cannot be the one authorizing your own spend. Because if you do that, who's to say you've acted rightly? Now, you might be above board. I'll do this. I'll just chip this in. Very, I mean, this is more like maybe family things. Family home, yeah? I've got access to my wife's account. She's got access to mine. If I'd like to move monies from one to the other, I'll ask her. I'll let her know we need to move money from here to here. I could do it, and she wouldn't question me. But let's assume I did it, and she didn't question me, and there was a problem with the fraud as it happened a few months ago. We had someone wanting to cash a check out of our accounts. And it was fraudulent. They had obtained our checkbook. And someone tried to cash a large amount out of the account. Now, the minute that came through, I got an alert on my mobile phone. And I got an alert on my mobile phone. I thought, this is odd. But what's the natural thing to do? First person I called, not so much of questioning the amount. It's not, I mean, she might have wanted to give an offering to the church. She might have. I mean, she would not necessarily, she wouldn't need to ask me. She might have, the Lord might have laid on her heart to give a large, sizable donation to the church. She doesn't need, she would do that. And I just wanted to check. We've had this amount, and I've got an alert. She said, no, I've not done that. Then I now know that definitely someone is playing a game here. Now, the reason I say that is if we go into the habit of moving things without speaking to each other, if that sort of call came through, I'll think, well, maybe, and it will flow through. You see what I mean by accountability and conflict, and at times conflicts of interest. I've used that as an illustration. But how much more the things of God? Now, effectively, please do not authorize your own. That's things that appear like, and things that might not be. So as an example, if you run a company, and you might have the best company, I might, as an architect, I am allowed to, in principle, offer a professional service to the church and to get paid. It's allowed. The regulations allow it. However, if the discussion is taking place, as a trustee and administrator, I need to excuse myself from that discussion and move out of the room because of the potential conflict. Now, to avoid all of that, when I'm doing that, I'll offer my services free because it might be difficult to explain to others outside how it is done. I've just, again, used a quick example of conflict, potential conflict. It's not inherently wrong, but how would others perceive it? And would you need to start explaining to others why I have done it this way? So that's the reason why I'm using that, saying it's about acting in your charity's best interest is by recognizing and dealing with potential for conflicts of interest. And ensure, even though you know that benefits to trustees are allowed, you need to be mindful of this. Extremely so. It's also being prepared to question and to challenge. And it's also about accepting majority decisions. Now this is interesting. We frequently have interesting debates amongst ourselves as administrators because we pack and put aside sentiments. We have engaging debates, different perspectives, all from a professional focus. We don't fall out, by the way, but we have them heated. Extremely so. We might feel very, very passionate. But at the end, we come to a consensus. We find a result. And we don't sweep it under the carpet. So there's no point going on to point B when we're still on point A. Because actually, if you do that, the discussions will be colored. Would rather extend the meeting or defer, and we'll get to the end result that everyone can align with. Why is that important? Because when we step out of that room, We are all behind that decision. And no one can say, oh, but I didn't agree with it. Because if you didn't agree with it, you should have said so in the room. And you are there until, and at times, and we need to be careful about this, there are things you might say, oh, I wouldn't have done it that way. That's different from there's something wrong in what is being done. Yeah, it's possible you might want to go from here to Manchester. You might choose to go by train. You might choose to fly. You might choose to drive. You might walk. You'll get to Manchester. But it's not enough to say, oh, but I would rather have gone by train. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about fundamental, it needs to be something wrong completely. We shouldn't be going to Manchester. We should be heading for New York. Yeah? Again, it's about acting in the best interest. And it's not about preserving the charity for its own sake. And it's not about serving personal interests. When we have those debates, it's not about interest. It's about the wider good. We put away self-interest and because it's actually not for personal gain. The next one is about managing resources responsibly. Both Pastor Sidney and Pastor Fumi have touched on this already. But it's also about managing risks, protecting assets, reputation, and people. At times, it's not just the risk, it's not just about physical risk, it's about reputation as well. Because if we do the wrong things, or it's projected out there that Christ Tabernacle has done this, or we're associated with that. So it might not be wrong for us to associate with ministers who are preaching prosperity and deliverance. It might not be. But if it would harm our reputation, we will not do it. So we might, you see where I'm going to in terms of that illustration. In this instance, we really do feel it would harm our reputation, by the way, if we're one focus. And we've had testimonies before of different things. It might not, there might be nothing wrong in asking people to give, and for churches that carry around, is it Wi-Fi? No, it's not wireless, contactless. Now, some churches now that do the contactless, there might not be anything wrong in it. Yeah, there might not be anything wrong with it, but we are a bit uneasy about it. And because we're uneasy about it, we don't do it because we feel there might be connotations. It might just be wrong because it might encourage people to give what they don't have. I'm not talking about the use of debit cards, but we cannot guarantee every time people use it that they're using a debit card and not a credit card. And at times someone might give emotionally by credit card and they're giving what they don't have. And we're not in the business of bankrupting members in the name of giving by sweet words. It's out of what you have rather than... Now, please don't mistake this from the issue where there are times as a church we have a need, we want to buy a property, and we all decide to tax ourselves, or we all decide, some of us might decide, I am capable of taking a loan out in my own name, not on behalf of the church, in my own name, because I can repay this loan. If I can take a loan out for a settee, I want to give, the church needs X amount now, and I can service it. And by the way, taking out personal finances now, a debt or debt that you are paying back under a predetermined agreement is not a debt, it's an obligation. A debt is actually when you have inability to pay. So if you have a means to pay, if I take out £1,000 loans and I come up with an agreement to repay £100 a month, I'm sure they'll charge me interest. If I go to a loan shark, they'll probably want me to repay £130 a month. And at the end of 1 year, I would have paid what in excess? 30 times 12. So I'll owe 1,000. Now, let's not go there. Okay. I like doing that in terms of ensuring that we're all sort of like awake and we're still with me. But the whole idea, the reason why I said that is that at times we might do that, but we don't want to get ourselves locked in. So it's about ensuring that reputational risks are managed. And then the resources of the charity, Pastor Sidney alluded to it earlier on, because it's church money doesn't mean it just gets spent anyhow. And we have an obligation to ensure it is spent effectively and wisely. So we challenge and question. should we be paying £1,000 per week for our bills? Or is there a way in which we can reduce it? Should we, because we've got the resources, pay £1,000 when actually we can ensure that we only pay 950? Because we have an obligation to the Lord to be good custodians of the resources that the Lord has put in our hands. I always like doing this at my place of work. Members of my team might come to me and say, oh, we need a specific item in a building, and that item will cost £10,000 extra. And I'll say, yeah, go ahead. On the same list, they'll put another item and say, oh, we need this item as well. We think we need this item, £200. And I'll say, no. Say, yeah, but I said, you want that. You don't need it. So it's not a case of the value. Do we need or do we want? They said, but Tayo, you've just approved a £10,000. Doesn't matter. You don't need that. You want it. Now, it's important in the church resources as well. We need to ensure that we manage that effectively. Two more aspects. One is to act with reasonable skill and care. Reasonable skill and care. And it's about using your skills and your experience. So that's what we've been talking about. What are your own personal skills? What are your own personal experiences? You need to bring it to play. And that's why it's important as well that you surround yourself with others who have wider experiences in different areas. Again, I'll chip this in. Just in case you go for an employment, you go to get employed, you go for an interview, and you don't get recruited, it's not always the case that it is because you don't have the right skills for the job. It's sometimes because your personal characteristics that you bring, which you have no control over, is not the right mix for the department at that time. Please note that. So at times we may not all be trustees or administrators, but it's probably because there's someone who has the skills already in that organization at that time. There are different ways in which we can all contribute. And it's also important. So as an example, I can recall on numerous occasions, if I want to interview people or I want to recruit, maybe people reporting to me, other directors reporting to me, I'll seek the recruitment and I would avoid anyone that looks so much like me in their outlook. You know why? Because we're not adding to the strength. If that individual has my own strength, my own skills. Now, it's not a case of being threatened. It's not a threat. It's to say that that individual, as an example in business development, I enjoy going out there and negotiating and doing the deals. Now, if I recruit the person who reports to me and also enjoys going out there and doing the deals, who's going to close the deals? Who will close it? We'll all be winning deals, and we'll get a bottleneck because we'll all be good at winning the deals. And we'll get here, and nobody will be closing the deals, and we're worse off. So at times, it's just think about it. You need to balance the skills. So you need to ensure that in your governance, you ensure you have the right skill balance. Find out who's very good at finance. Find out who's very good at corporate governance. Find out who's very good at... Find out those who are good at listening and making sense of what others are saying and bring it. Because at times, we could all be too narrow-minded and focused, and I don't see anything else. I'm just going down that, and someone else is saying, hold on. And it's about complementary skills, bringing other perspectives to it, because it's so easy for us to go one direction without looking forward. And it's also being prepared in case something does go wrong. Things would go wrong. We'll get things wrong at times. It would be wrong for us to suggest we've not gotten things wrong. We have. We have gotten some things wrong, but it's by learning from those experiences. When things go wrong, we sit back and say, not looking for blame, who went wrong. It's not a case of, actually, what are you going to do? It's gone wrong. Yeah? We can't do anything about the past, but we can do something about the future. So it's a case of saying, okay, this has gone wrong. How did it go wrong? Not who was responsible. How? What circumstances led to it going wrong, so that we can avoid such circumstances in future. So going forward, what do we do about this situation going forward? And how do we ensure it doesn't happen again? Solutions are varied. and it's the midst of the multitude of counsel, then you have direction and focus. So we'll then discuss and debate those things. And finally, and the reason I'm not dwelling too much on this, the final part of the jigsaw is about ensuring that our charity is accountable. It means we have to meet our legal, accounting, and reporting requirements. Both Pastor Sidney and Pastor Fumi have touched on this. It means that we need to be able to show that our charity complies with the law and is effective. We need to be accountable to one another. We need to ensure that staff, employees, are accountable to the board of trustees. And we need to welcome accountability as an opportunity, not a burden. As an opportunity, not a burden. Please spend some time going through the Essential Trustee. It's 40 pages long. If you can, invest in Paul Martin's book. I'll tell him that I've said so now so that he can give me royalties. But please, the idea is that there's a lot to learn. Every church, we're sharing with those, with churches in PVM who are not part of Christ Faith Tabernacle. We're sharing some of these things. So please align yourself, get yourself ready to be a beacon, such that when the axe comes, I'm not prophesying, I'm just saying what I know would happen at some point, when they're beginning to challenge and to take out and stop other organizations. I mean, if some things have come up recently and hit the likes of Oxfam, and I'm not saying that in a negative kind of way, those things that happen to Oxfam, they are things that are very, very difficult for charities that operate in their level to control. Extremely difficult. We are looking to learn. The Charity Commission have instigated a review. As a charity, we're looking to learn, where we'll be watching out for those sort of things. It's one of the reasons why, as an example, I didn't touch on it specifically, but maybe I should. One of the reasons why we have DBS checks for all our Sunday school teachers. If you are in a church and you have people having contact with children and vulnerable adults or vulnerable people in society, we are required under the charity regulations to ensure that such individuals do not have a criminal record. Such individuals have not had instances in the past where they've molested children. They need to be above board. We need to do that. We owe that obligation, because if we don't, you only need something. When the Lord raises you as a church and as a people, someone will bring something that will trip you up. Believe this or not, I mean, one of the things we have to declare each year when we're renewing our insurance policies, you'll find this interesting, is as any member of the board of trustees or administrators either been declared bankrupt or indeed refused insurance on a personal level. Are you listening now? That's their own personal level. Have they ever had any issues and brushes with the law on a personal level? Because if they are, it affects our insurance premium as a church. So effectively, such individuals would either need to step down from their roles or also recognize that actually it's not just your life any longer. If you agree to sit in this, you now have accountability across board. Because, by the way, if I get something wrong as a trustee of Christ Faith Tabernacle, it would also affect my day job. If I fail as a director, because that's what is classified as, trustee, a director of Christ Faith Tabernacle, I'm not qualified to act as a director of another organization. Now, high stakes, high responsibility, but one worth bearing when we know we want to walk in the fullness of what God has in store for us. God bless you.